A former Playboy model claims Sean Combs invited her to a party in Tokyo, but it wasn't what she was expecting. And what she claims happened inside of a hotel room involves, of all things, J-Lo. Time to break down this new account concerning the embattled rapper and media mogul. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, we got this interesting new account to talk to you about in the Sean Diddy Combs saga, and it concerns a purported former Playboy model. But as we listen to her account, I actually do wonder if this could help the defense's case. I'm going to explain why, but let me lay this out for you. So we have Rachel Kennedy, and she spoke on Daily Mail's The Trial of Diddy podcast, and she recounted how back in 2000, she met Sean Combs at a gentleman's club in Tokyo, Japan. And she explained how she had been working there as a dancer. And she says one night Combs invited her and her friends back to his hotel for a party, but when she shows up, she says it really wasn't a party. It was actually just Combs, who allegedly opened the door wearing a bathrobe and holding a bottle of champagne. Kennedy said on the podcast, quote, "This is not the kind of party that we were all expecting." But Kennedy explains, "But we went in, we didn't think anything weird. He was friendly enough to where we decided, okay, we'll just hang out with him." Now, according to the Daily Mail, Kennedy seems to suggest that Combs had invited her to a freak-off. Now, this is a term that many of you who have been following Combs' criminal case will know, but to those of you who do not know, first, let me apologize, but this is what it is. As described in Combs' criminal indictment on charges of sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution, it reads, Combs and other members and associates of the Combs Enterprise, which, by the way, prosecutors claim was a criminal organization that engaged in all sorts of illegal, illicit activity, they wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, pleasured himself during, and often electronically recorded. Freak-offs occurred regularly, sometimes lasted multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial sex workers. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. Now, back to Rachel Kennedy, she says that she and her friends, they walk in, and what do they find? A TV playing a music video of Jennifer Lopez on a constant loop. Now, at the time, Combs had been dating the singer, and Kennedy says that Combs was even on the phone with J-Lo as they were there and this video was being played. Kennedy said on the podcast, it was kind of an odd thing to find out that we were watching videos. It seemed a little bit creepy to me, very disrespectful, since we were already in his room and there was no party going on. Now, this part is interesting, too, where Kennedy says, we were doing cocaine that evening, and he said that he didn't like drugs and that he didn't want anything like that around him. So we would sneak in the bathroom and do it because he said he only smoked pot and he didn't want the drugs around him. That is interesting, considering prosecutors say that he and his criminal associates had engaged in repeated narcotics possession and distribution, cocaine, oxy, meth, GHB, ketamine. So it's interesting that she said that. Now, from there, Kennedy claims that Combs directed her and a friend to another room where he essentially persuaded them to perform oral sex on him. Now, Kennedy does make it clear that neither she nor her friend were forced to do that. Quote, we both did. We had quite a bit of champagne at that point, and we just did what he said. It wasn't forceful. There's nothing forceful about it. It was just, he's like, this is what I want, and both me and the other girl proceeded to pleasure him that way. Then she explains something bizarre that happened after this, how Combs' bodyguard, barged in, angry that Combs was seemingly messing around with the woman that he maybe had some sort of interest in, apparently from the night before, because she said he was violent. He essentially kicked them out of the room. Combs apparently did nothing while this happened. And then Kennedy says that when she went to the lobby, she calls Combs' room, asks him what just happened, but she says Combs hung up. But Kennedy cautions, years later, knowing now what I now know, I think we were more than lucky. And looking back on that situation, Kennedy explained, in no way do I compare myself to these other people that have been brutalized by him, but it makes sense now that I see everything that's going on. She said, he is the puppet master of this, and that's why these people think it's okay, because he's teaching them that this kind of behavior is acceptable, and that's regular people. They aren't celebrities or executives or whatever. We don't matter. Our lives don't matter. We're just nothing to them. We're disposable. By the way, what do I talk about all the time here on Sidebar? I talk about the law, right? I talk about legal rulings, legal decisions. Well, I have a landmark one for you right now that has just changed things in a massive way. Why? Because you can now legally trade on who will win the 2024 election. Yes, that is legal. And that is because our sponsor of Sidebar, Kalshi, went to court and won legal approval for election trading for the first time in over 100 years. So not only can you essentially bet on the 2024 presidential election winner, but with Kalshi, you can bet on who will control the House and Senate, who's going to win the swing states. Tomorrow, big day. And it's not just politics, by the way. You can bet on other future events too, like will Taylor Swift win top artist on Spotify this year? What's going to be the Rotten Tomatoes score for upcoming movies like Gladiator 2? I actually think it's going to be above 85% personally, but there is so much more. You're going to be like, wow, I can trade on that? Yes, this is the only place to trade on events like this in all 50 states. And right now, you can sign up using our link, kalshi.com/sidebar, or you can scan the QR code on screen. And if you're one of the first 500 traders who deposit $100, Kalshi will give you a free $20 credit. That's kalshi.com/sidebar. Okay, I want to break this down right now, and I want to bring in special guest, Law&Crime's own lawyer, our general counsel, Elizabeth Vulaj, to talk a little bit more about this. Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
What do you make of this?
Yeah, this was really interesting. I listened to the entire podcast interview. I thought it was really interesting that she noted, this wasn't a forceful encounter. This was entirely consensual. So it differed a little bit from the claims that other people are claiming that, they were lured, they were forced to perform these acts, they were potentially put under the substances of various narcotics by P. Diddy and other people that work for him. Whereas here, a lot of it seemed consensual. I think one thing that was really interesting was noting the behavior of the bodyguard. And one of the things that Rachel Kennedy had said was the reason she's coming out with this story was to really highlight not just Combs's behavior, but the behavior of people around him and how they, helped facilitate these kinds of things.
Well, he's charged with racketeering conspiracy, so he can't just be in a criminal agreement with himself. He can't just be in a criminal organization with himself. So it does make you wonder, who are the other participants? Who are the people, the employees, the associates, the bodyguards that were helping him allegedly commit these acts, and also who might be testifying against him, might be cooperating with the government. What struck me about this account, and taking everything that Rachel Kennedy says is true, and by the way, you listened to the podcast. Did she seem credible to you?
She seemed credible. She had a lot of details. She recounted the time that it occurred, how, she first initially met Combs, a lot of specific details about when she went into the room, what he was wearing, the music videos that he had playing of his former girlfriend, Jennifer Lopez, how he wanted them to watch, and, his interactions with them. So she seemed able to recall a lot of it with specific detail.
By the way, and I'll get to how I think this might help the defense in a second, but what I thought was interesting is that her account, and I think we talked about this last week on another sidebar, how John Legend's manager came out and says that she was in a very uncomfortable situation at a Combs party. And I could be wrong, but it seems like there are a lot of episodes, alleged episodes, where people might not have realized what it was. Hey, this is just a one-off weird situation. But given what we know now, and given what Combs is charged with now, and these are just allegations, but given what he's being accused of now, people are maybe remembering these things and maybe putting a little bit more context into them. And I thought that's key. And whether or not it plays into his criminal case or not, the fact that you have a lot of people coming out now with these kind of accounts that might seem isolated, but they're part of a larger narrative maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And two things on that. One of them is that, during the podcast, she said she probably wouldn't have come out with this story had not all of these allegations and lawsuits come out. She said maybe this was just an isolated incident. This was something kind of rocky that we went through. But now, knowing what she knows now, it adds a lot more context to it. And she even says, we were one of the lucky ones. We weren't assaulted. We weren't in any form, whether physical or sexual. consensual. Another thing that she also mentioned was, had it not been for Cassie Ventura coming out with this complaint, she might not have ever told her story, because she said there was some embarrassment about that. So I think a lot of people are now coming out with stories of these incidences, even if it's not in a similar circumstance to Cassie's claims or other people's claims. Now I think they're looking back at it and saying, oh wow, this makes a lot more sense.
It happens all the time in murder cases when you have somebody who's accused, I remember with Brian Kohberger, when he was arrested, then all people who went to school with him were around them like, yeah, I noticed something odd now. And whether that matters or plays into the case is a separate question, but it is interesting that people come out and talk about their experiences with Sean Combs in a different way. I think this might play to the defense's advantage, because whether or not she's called as a witness, whether or not this specific incident plays into the case, whether it's even brought up at a criminal trial, which I find doubtful, the idea that she says it wasn't forceful. And we know the defense is right now building their case based on these current charges that everything was consensual, and that maybe this isn't what somebody really wanted. It wasn't like they had an attraction to Sean Combs per se, but they weren't forced into doing this. There was no sex trafficking. There was no racketeering. Talk to me about how you think something like this might be something Sean Combs' attorneys might use to benefit their criminal case.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that his attorneys have said in the past was that, he might have engaged in acts that are not typically of the norm, but what they're saying is this is all consensual, even if it's involving multiple people. Everybody here is consenting adults, and you shouldn't, essentially morally judge someone about what goes on behind closed doors as long as it's consensual. And I think they'll probably point to incidences like this and say, look, this is coming directly from the participant. She's saying nothing forceful happened. It was all consensual. So I think they might point to this and say, this is just another example of how there was no sort of trafficking or forceful nature involved.
Do you think she'll be a witness for the prosecution or the defense in a criminal case?
Yeah, I'm not so sure how much value, she might have as a witness. The story that she came out with was, really interesting and helpful, but this incident took place in 2000. One of the things that the indictment had mentioned was it was focusing on a lot of incidences that occurred over the past 15 years, so from 2009 onwards. Yeah. So there's always a possibility, anybody who's had sort of firsthand knowledge of this would be helpful, but I'd be surprised if they go that far back.
And I don't know, for the defense, do they call in, hey, we're going to bring in all these women who he had consensual relationships with, or they were in similar, maybe they were part of freak-offs, because I don't think his defense team is going to run away from the term freak-off. I think they're going to embrace it and say, yeah, these were freak-offs, but they were all consensual. How widespread that defense could be and how much the judge will allow that is a separate question, right? I don't know how I have always asked this, how wide the prosecution's case is going to be, or is it more specific that they isolated, they're really focusing on freak-offs, which, by the way, I don't know if this even categorizes as a freak-off.
Yeah, that was one of the thoughts that I initially had. I know a lot of the headlines had said, she was lured into a freak-off. One of the things that she said was that when she came to the room, it was just allegedly Sean Combs alone in a bathroom. Yeah. The freak-offs are posed as sort of more multiple people involved. There's potential drugging here, forceful acts, commercial sex workers. Yeah. There's really none of that. It was just these two women and allegedly Sean Combs.
That's why I don't even know if she'll play a role in it, because right now they're really focused on the freak-offs. What do you make of the J-Lo aspect of this? Because to be clear, J-Lo hasn't publicly commented on Sean Combs' legal trouble since they all began, but the video playing while these women come to the room, him on the phone with her, I thought that was an interesting aspect.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I think it's just another example of just the strangeness. Obviously, a lot of these allegations involve really heartbreaking details and allegations, but also just sort of really depraved and strange details. And I think this is just one of them. And she hasn't commented on the allegations. There's been videos of paparazzi or other people interviewing her and trying to ask, but so far she hasn't said anything.
Do you think she'll make a comment? Do you think she'll make a statement?
I don't think so. I'm sure her legal team has probably advised her not to say anything, and I think anybody, especially in the public eye, who comments is sort of not inviting themselves to be a witness, but prosecution might start to pay a little bit more attention to them and see if they're open to speaking.
Just going back to the idea of this incident, there was nothing illegal there, right? I mean, well, maybe drug use, maybe a little bit, but on the other side, there was nothing illegal about that. So I think that whether or not defense call her as a witness, it's a blueprint of how we could say, here's a situation, might seem weird, But if you really look at it, what's illegal? I've had to talk to people about this when they talk about the freak-offs. Like, what's illegal about group sex? I mean, yeah, you put the drugs to the side, sure, but I'm like, no, it's the force, the fraud, the coercion element to it, the commercial sex workers. But there was nothing illegal in this incident, right?
No, nothing struck me as illegal. And I think with the freak-offs, one of the key elements is, drugging people, as you said, people who are under the influence, they can't really fully consent. The commercial sex workers who are possibly transported across state lines. So there's all of those elements versus something like this where, she says openly they voluntarily took certain drugs such as cocaine. She doesn't say that they were forced to or that they were, physically made to take that. It was all voluntary. And she says, this was a consensual encounter.
You heard me mention the point about the drugs, right? Where she's like, Holmes said he doesn't really want to do drugs or be involved in drugs. But if you listen to prosecutors, he was constantly in possession of drugs, distributing them. In fact, when they picked him up in New York, there was like some pink powdery substance they found. So, I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe he is never involved with drugs. Maybe these are just allegations from the government. Maybe he's changed over the years, his position. But I thought that was very key that she said that.
I thought it was really key as well, and I thought it was interesting. She's saying that they voluntarily took cocaine, that he didn't. I think she mentioned that he might have taken marijuana. But to me, it sort of speaks to the element of control that he possibly likes to have. One of the things that people say about the freak-offs is that, these participants who weren't really willing were put under the influence, and I would imagine if he's someone that wants to have control over these types of situations, he would be pretty measured in how much he took himself. So I thought the fact that they had taken certain narcotics but he hadn't was a really pointed note.
And look, for those who believe everything that's being said about Sean Combs isn't real or it's all fake, the fact that she came out and in a situation where there's an environment everybody's accusing him of sexual assault, she didn't do that. That probably goes to her credibility in a way. Like, she could have probably, if for whatever reason, if she wasn't an honest person, say, hey, this happened to me. But she was like, no. Let me explain exactly what the situation was. It's not like everybody else's. And for me, reading it, my opinion, it made her more credible.
I think so as well. And one of the things that she really said was, I really wanted to specifically talk about this to point to the behavior of the bodyguard who got really belligerent and violent. And she said she could have easily accused him of something that wasn't true. But she said, I wanted to make a point to note that it's not just the behavior of Combs we should be looking at, but the people around him who, displayed this violent behavior. And he didn't really do anything to reprimand him. So I think that also speaks to the racketeering charge and looking at the people who are around him.
That's so well said. And listen, I'm so happy that you came back on to talk about this. We're obviously going to talk more about the Diddy scandal. There's always new updates every day in this case. But Elizabeth, good to see you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.